right, guys, let's begin. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what we learned and maybe what we didn't learn at the congressional hearing yesterday. I think one thing is overtly obvious. The mayors of these sanctuary cities, in one way or another, they absolutely refuse to cooperate with ICE, at least to the level that the federal government wants them to. And, on top of that, you're probably not aware of this, by the way. So Boston is now trying to pass 3 acts that were, of course, simultaneously released on the same day they had the congressional hearing. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. But anyway, these mayors, they're releasing criminals back onto the streets. They are draining taxpayer money, your money, and they're doing it for one reason and one reason only. So here's how I'm going to frame this. And this is how I've been thinking a lot about this. You really need to think logically and pragmatically about the circumstances. Whether you like it or not, people, they really work off of incentives. Most people, they primarily work off incentives. And nearly all economic, political, let's say social behavior, to some extent, can be explained through those incentives. They can shape decision-making and end up influencing economic choices, and they could even determine political and social trends as well. So whether it's about, let's call it money, power, or safety, social recognition, whatever it may be, people respond to what benefits them the most. I think we could all agree on that, right? Now, what I'm about to tell you, you could really apply this logic to both sides of the political aisle. But right now, based on the circumstances we are in, if you apply and look at this, let's call it the incentive framework. If you apply that to illegal immigration, here's what's happening on a meta level, if you want to call it that. So I think the Democrats are trying to maintain political power and exploit illegal immigration by creating incentives that benefit the party in the short term. Even if those policies hurt taxpayers, they drain resources, and they undermine the rule of law. They are essentially using these incentives to ensure that immigrants, let's say both legal and illegal, become a long-term voter base that keeps them in office or promotes to get them into office. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, if they stayed the course and they stayed on this trend, eventually wouldn't people catch on, or wouldn't there be some levels of diminishing returns? And I think the answer to that really is an astounding yes. And I also think that this is the main reason why people voted for Donald Trump. Here's what happened in the Republican Party. They effectively used the Democrats' strategy against them. It wasn't the only reason, of course, that he won, right? In terms of percentages, I think it's a relatively big reason that he won. So what I mean by that is this. Democrats more than likely saw some levels of short-term political gains by supporting open borders and by having, let's call them, more lax immigration policies. You saw how many people flooded into the country. But really what happened is this kind of backfired because those short-term benefits were ultimately engulfed by longer-term consequences. So as illegal immigration kept on increasing, you have to realize it didn't just impact, let's say, what Republican belief systems or beliefs are. It started to affect everybody, including the Democrats' own voter base, legal immigrants, and independent voters as well. The reason this happened was because and I've talked about this before, a huge majority of people in the United States, they became exhausted with these circumstances. They became exhausted with mainstream media. And there's really only so much emotional manipulation that the mainstream media can pump out that people could take. It just is what it is. Again, it's like a diminishing return effect, right? It just doesn't work anymore. And people woke up to these circumstances. And guess what? During the election season, the majority of people spoke. And that's what happened. Now, let's talk a little bit about the back end side of this, some of the data. This is the way it works, okay? The more illegal immigrants who remain in the country result in a larger pool of future voters that are likely to favor the party supporting more lenient immigration policies. I hope that makes sense. The studies and research that I did and that I read show that newly naturalized citizens, they will overwhelmingly support the political party that advocates for their pathways to citizenship, some levels of government assistance programs, and of course, if there's less enforcement of immigration laws, they're going to support that party. And that would make the most logical sense based on the incentive framework, as I pointed out earlier. And this is why these Democratic lawmakers consistently push for policies. If you look at the DACA expansion, if you look at the different amnesty proposals and access to taxpayer-funded services, when you look at these things as a whole, in the long run, these policies create a more reliable voter base. Why do you think, look at it this way, here's another easy one. Why do you think voter ID is such a contentious topic? And why do you think most Democrats are opposed to voter ID? The answer is very simple. It's about control over the voting process. Democrats overwhelmingly oppose strict voter ID requirements. And their argument is that they suppress minority votes. And guess what? There could be absolutely some truth to that. There's no doubt about it. But there's also another truth. And that's when you have looser voting laws, that creates vulnerabilities, which inherently make it easier for non-citizens to be mistakenly registered or cast illegal votes. And that's really whether they're done intentionally or not. I was reading, this is another good one. I was reading an example of this in New York City. They did pass a law allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections. But guess what? It was later struck down in the courts. And there's a couple other states. I think Washington, D.C. was one, San Francisco was another, and even Vermont. They tried to do similar things. So when you think about it, if Democrats had no interest in expanding the voter pool, why push for driver's licenses for illegal immigrants and automatic voter registration in multiple states, right? Think about it. It's about shifting the electorate over time. That's all that it is. It doesn't make any more logical sense to be defending what they're defending and doing what they're doing, because it's costing the taxpayer money and it is a burden to a lot of the taxpayers. So, of course, this entire thing, it's not entirely about just letting illegal immigrants stay. This is the other portion of it, right? It's about giving them access to taxpayer-funded services. And that brings us, let's talk about the money, okay? And here's the truth that I don't think a lot of people want to admit. So, guess what? You're paying for this, right? You are paying for this entire system. Immigrants that came here legally are paying for this entire system. It is what it is. That is what's happening here. And when you take a look at a city like Boston, as I said earlier, on the same day as the congressional hearing, Boston tried to sneakily push in 3 major pro-illegal immigration policies that shift the financial burden onto the Massachusetts taxpayers. First, and this isn't something that's necessarily new, they have the Safe Communities Act, and that basically bans local police from working with ICE, even when they're dealing with violent criminals. I think you guys are aware of that. Next was the Dignity Not Deportations Act, and I believe this is one of the new ones. What this does is it prohibits Massachusetts from renting detention beds to ICE, which in turn would make it harder to hold and deport illegal immigrants. But this is the big one, guys. They created something called the Immigration Legal Defense Act. And what this does, it creates a taxpayer-funded legal defense to basically give illegal immigrants free lawyers to fight deportation. And again, it's something that you and I have to pay for. So think about this. Why did Mayor Wu avoid discussing the cost to the taxpayers? Why was she so elusive on that topic? She pretended like she didn't know. Why is the Massachusetts auditor struggling to track taxpayer money? It's obvious. These policies are not designed to help the average citizen. They are designed to expand government dependence and strengthen political control. That's why Massachusetts is so blue. It is the only reason why Massachusetts is so blue, okay? They are not being completely transparent with all this stuff, okay? This is, when you think about it, this is really some levels of a self-inflicted crisis. And all of these mayors know it, but they don't care because it will help them politically. And they are not only doing a disservice to the American taxpayers, but they're also doing a disservice to people that came here legally and even the people who are coming here illegally. How? Because they're exploiting them for political gains. They're exploiting them by, again, the incentive framework. You know, we have a border for a reason. We have a justice system for a reason. And we have laws for a reason. And yet the sanctuary city policies, they make a mockery of that entirely. And that's exactly what happened yesterday. Period. End of story. The entire thing was a mockery. They kept on reflecting back to their policies when they were asked questions, and they skirted around every single question that was asked to them, unless they got a softball question that was asked by their political party. It is what it is. This is where we are at, okay? This is where we are at, and they are going to continue to defend these policies, and they will reference those policies whenever they have to answer a question. Nothing is a simple yes or no. It's a default back to what our policies are and then supply a half-baked answer. That's essentially what happened here. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future of this. Now, guys, this is my opinion. This is my opinion, and that's how I think these things work. So that's it for today's video. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.